How you doing, Eric? Can I get a mic check for you?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to the Fair Housing Act, Requirement 2, Accessible Public and Common Use Areas. This training is approximately an hour and a half in length. The GoToWebinar platform viewing screen. Under the GoToWebinar platform, you will find several dashboard items. This includes the viewing screen. At the top, it states whose screen you are viewing and allows you to zoom in or screenshot the items you see on the screen. The webcam function should be disabled. GoToWebinar dashboard and control panel. You can set up the dashboard to include the screen that is being shared and the GoToWebinar control panel. Or you can move it to another window if you have multiple screens. GoToWebinar control panel. The GoToWebinar control panel is where you will control your audio, review any attached handouts, and ask any questions. Today, we have 3 handouts in the handout section of the GoToWebinar control panel. These handouts include the Fair Housing Accessibility Guidelines, the Fair Housing Act Design Manual, and the Participant Workbook. GoToWebinar Knowledge Check Questions. During the webinar, we will be conducting knowledge checks. The GoToWebinar platform calls these quick polls. When we launch the polls, they will automatically appear. To select your answer, click the circle next to the answer and hit Submit at the bottom. GoToWebinar certificates. You will receive an attendance certificate for attending at least 45 minutes of today's presentation. You will not receive an attendance certificate if you attend for less than 45 minutes. The attendance certificate will be sent to you on Wednesday. If you take the final quiz, which will be available at the end of today's presentation, and pass, you will receive a passing certificate. The final quiz was in the reminder emails and will be in the email that comes to participants 2 hours after the end of the webinar. You may take the quiz anytime following this training, and passing certificates will immediately be issued for a score of 80% or higher. Moving on to agenda and topics. Today's agenda includes an introduction, topics, and learning objectives to help you understand Fair Housing Act Requirement 2, accessible public and common use areas. During this session, we will cover the following topics and learning objectives. Our terminal learning objective, or TLO, is to identify the design and construction guidance provided for Fair Housing Act Requirement 2 within the Fair Housing Accessibility Guidelines and the Fair Housing Act Design Manual. Our topics and enabling learning objectives, or ELOs, are as follows. Topic 1, Fair Housing Act Overview, and the ELO, to identify the history and protections of the Fair Housing Act, or FHA. Topic 2, what's covered in Requirement 2. The ELO, identify the type of public and common use areas covered under Requirement 2. Topic 3, on-site spaces, where the ELO, to identify on-site facilities covered under Requirement 2. Moving into topic 4, interior spaces, where the ELO will be to identify interior facilities covered under Requirement 2. Then we'll move into topic 5, Okay, apologize about that, folks. Had some internet difficulties, so I'll repeat what I just read. Topic 5, which is the personal hygiene care spaces. And that ELO will be to identify the personal hygiene care spaces covered under Requirement 2. From there, we'll have a live Q&A session. We'll do a knowledge check review, and then we will close, and then you will have the chance to take the final quiz. This training relies on the provisions of the Fair Housing Act and its regulations. Fair Housing Accessibility Guidelines, the American National Standards Institute, or ANSI, A117.1, 1986 version, and the FHA Design Manual for the guidance it provides about compliance with the technical design and construction requirements in the Act. Okay, I'm going to briefly pause. PowerPoint presentation's a little out of whack. Give me 1 second. Okay. Sorry about that. Presenters. Today's presenter will include, and myself, Mr. Michael Dizon. Mr. Contreras has 20 years of experience performing accessibility consulting services, Americans with Disability Act, or ADA, compliance evaluations, implementation plan development, ADA corporate policy guidance and interpretation, and ADA compliance reviews. During the live Q&A session, Mr. Contreras will answer your questions, which you can type in the questions pod. And I am Mr. Dizon, and I have several years of experience facilitating webinars, workshops, and live events, and look forward to assisting with this training. For technical support, will be provided by Ms. Corey Nolan and Ms. Alexia Brown. Ms. Liz Dyson will organize your questions for the Q&A portion of today's presentation. The Fair Housing Accessibility First program provides a design and construction resource center, also known as the DCRC, which is staffed Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Eastern. The DCRC provides comprehensive and detailed instructions, helpful online web resources, and an information line for technical guidance and support. You can reach the DCRC toll-free at 888-341-7781. You can also reach the DCRC at fairhousingfirst@hud.gov. And with that, we're going to move into our first topic, FHA overview. FHA history. With the enactment of Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, housing discrimination based on color, national origin, race, religion, and sex became a violation of the law. Congress included familial status and disability to these sometimes intersecting protected categories. This amendment made it illegal to deny the rental or sale of a dwelling unit to a person because that person has a disability. Disability protections include the right to request reasonable accommodations and reasonable modifications of dwelling units and public and common use areas on covered sites. For more information about the protections of the FHA, scan this QR code or visit HUD's website. FHA Safe Harbor Standards. A single accessibility standard is not established by the FHA. So architects, designers, and builders must choose a standard that produces a multifamily dwelling development that meets or exceeds the accessibility of the FHA. Experienced building professionals employ verified and objective standards known as safe harbors to ensure compliance with the FHA. There are 15 HUD-approved safe harbors. And for a list of HUD-approved safe harbors, scan the QR code or visit the Frequently Asked Questions page on HUD's website. Fair Housing Accessibility Guidelines. The intent of the FHA is realized by the 7 requirements of the Fair Housing Accessibility Guidelines, also referred to as the guidelines. The 7 requirements establish minimal levels of accessibility. They apply to covered multifamily dwellings designed and constructed for first occupancy after March 13th, 1991. Today's training focuses on the technical specifications in Requirement 2, accessible and usable public and common use areas. The guidelines establish ANSI A117.1 1986 version as a minimum standard to comply with when designing these areas. The Fair Housing Act Design Manual, page 2.4, includes a chart that identifies ANSI scoping specifications for public and common use elements and spaces that must be accessible. And with that, that takes us to our first knowledge check. And this knowledge check reads, the guidelines establish blank as a minimum standard to comply with when designing public and common use areas. Your first option, ADA M13-1991. The second option, ANSI A117.1-1986. And the third option, ANSI A117.1-1968. So go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this reads, the guidelines establish blank as a minimum standard to comply with when designing public and common use areas. The first option, ADA M13-1991. Second option, ANSI A117.1-1986. And the third option, ANSI A117.1-1968. And I'll give a few more moments for folks to get their selections in. All right, go ahead and close that poll. Thank you so much. For our topic 1, key takeaways. In 1988, Congress increased the scope of the FHA to include familial status and disability. A safe harbor is a verified, objective standard that ensures compliance with the FHA. There are 15 HUD-approved safe harbors. The FHA's 7 requirements apply to covered multifamily dwellings designed and constructed for first occupancy after March 13th, 1991. And lastly, the guidelines establish ANSI A117.1-1986 as a minimum standard to comply with when designing public and common use areas. And with that, it's going to take us into topic 2, what's covered in requirement 2. What's covered? Entrances and routes. Requirement 2 ensures that individuals with mobility challenges can access all the public and common use spaces on an FHA covered site. The benefits of requirement 2 rely on the specifications in requirement 1 and can only be fully realized if buildings on a site have an accessible entrance on an accessible route. What's covered? On-site facilities. Requirement 2 safeguards access to public and common areas inside FHA covered buildings and facilities that may be outside the covered building but are on site and a part of the development. Public areas covered in requirement 2 include, but are not limited to, such site facilities as parking areas, walks, recreation facilities, clubhouses, pools, mailboxes, car washes, garages, laundry facilities, trash dumpsters, playgrounds, dog parks, and other spaces. What's covered? Interior facilities. Public and common use areas include interior facilities such as rental offices, toilet and bathing rooms, exercise and game rooms, party rooms, kitchens, office centers, and other spaces. What's covered? Elevator buildings. In elevator buildings containing covered units, the public and common use areas may be located on any floor. Facilities unique to these types of buildings often include elevators, trash chute rooms, roof deck lounges, parking garages, and other facilities located throughout the building on different levels. residential housing with 2- and 3-story walk-up type buildings with single-story dwellings on the ground floor, only the ground floor dwellings are covered and must comply with the accessibility requirements. Since the upper floors in these types of developments are typically not served by an accessible route, public and common use areas, including the stairs going up, the halls, corridors, breezeways, and the entry doors on the upper levels are not covered. However, if a common use facility is located on the upper floor of a walk-up type, there must be a comparable facility located on the accessible level. What's covered? Sites with multiple facilities. On a site where multiple public and common use facilities occur, a sufficient number, or at least one, of accessible facilities of each type must be made accessible to ensure equal opportunity for use by persons with disabilities. More detail. What's covered? 2010 ADA standards. In most multifamily developments, dwellings and common use areas are not covered by the ADA or the accessibility provisions of the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. However, portions of public and common use areas that are open to the general public and not just to residents of the development are considered public accommodations under Title III of the ADA and would have to comply with the ADA and FHA. Examples of such common use areas are leasing and sales offices and the other facilities that serve them, such as parking lots, building entrances, and toilet rooms. When designing a feature to which both the FHA and ADA apply, check both applicable standards and choose the standard that provides the most accessibility. And that leads us to our second knowledge check, which reads, portions of public and common use areas open to the general public must comply with which? First option, FHA and ICC. Second option, ADA and FHA. And the third option, ADA and ICC. I'll go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this knowledge check reads, portions of public and common use areas open to the general public must comply with which disability rights law? First option, FHA and ICC. Second option, ADA and FHA. And the third option, ADA and ICC. All right, we'll give folks a few more moments to get those selections in. All right, thank you so much. Go ahead and close that poll. That takes us to key takeaways. Requirement 2 ensures that individuals with mobility challenges can access all the public and common use spaces on an FHA covered site. Requirement 2 relies on Requirement 1, and buildings on a site must have an accessible entrance on an accessible route. Public areas covered in Requirement 2 include buildings and facilities outside the covered building, but on an FHA site. Public and common use areas also include interior facilities, in elevator buildings containing covered units. The public and common use areas covered may be located on any floor. If a common use facility is located on the upper floor of a walk-up type development, there must be a comparable facility located on the accessible level. On a site where multiple facilities occur, a sufficient number, at least one, of accessible facilities of each type is provided. And lastly, portions of public and common use areas, if they are open to the general public, are considered public accommodations under Title III of the ADA and must comply with the ADA and FHA. All right, that takes us to topic 3. I do apologize, looks like we're having some network issues with the closed captioning. So give me 1 second while I try to remedy that. Okay, topic 3, on-site spaces. On-site facilities. Requirement 2 specifies that public and common use areas be accessible to people with disabilities, permitting access to and use of amenities. In this topic, we will cover general specifications for on-site facilities, including parking areas, recreation areas, laundry areas, mailbox areas, and trash disposal areas. Access to public and common use areas may include parking. Developments may provide different types of parking, such as carports, detached garages, and covered parking within buildings containing units. It is important that at least one of each type be made accessible and provided on the same terms and range of choices offered to other residents. Accessible parking spaces. The minimum specification in the ANSI standard for an accessible parking space is a 96-inch wide parking space and a 60-inch wide access aisle. The width of the space and the access aisle help ensure that people using the area have enough room to unload a wheelchair and get out of a vehicle safely. Accessible parking spaces serving a public leasing office or another facility open to the public located within a multifamily project are subject to the ADA. In these cases, a 96-inch wide access aisle for a van accessible parking is required. The complete standard for a van accessible parking space can be found in the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. State and local building codes often have similar requirements for van accessible parking spaces. Resident parking. In the provisions of Requirement 2 in the guidelines, minimum levels of accessible parking are established. For residents, 2% of parking spaces serving covered dwelling units and upon request by persons with disabilities. A minimum of one accessible space at each site facility where parking is provided, such as recreational facilities. Visitor parking. For visitors, a sufficient number of spaces to provide access to grade level entrances of covered multifamily dwellings should be provided. A minimum of one space at a sales or rental office should be provided. A sufficient number can be established by examining the total number of visitor parking spaces provided compared to the total size of a project. A one space minimum is required, but more should be provided if a large amount of visitor parking is provided for residents' benefit. And with that, we go into knowledge check 3, which reads, ANSI requires a 96-inch wide accessible parking space for parking for each site facility. The first option is true, and the second option is false. So go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this reads, ANSI requires a 96-inch wide accessible parking space for parking for each site facility. First option is true, second option is false. All right, give a few more moments to get your selections in. All right, go ahead and close this poll. Thank you so much. ANSI, accessible doors. ANSI 4.13, doors, provides detailed specifications for accessible doors. Accessible doors must provide a minimum 32-inch clear opening measured between the face of the door and the opposing doorstop when the door is open 90 degrees. Accessible doors must provide maneuvering clearances that vary depending on the approach. Accessible doors must also meet threshold, hardware, and opening force requirements. They must be equipped with usable hardware mounted no higher than 48 inches that can be used without tight grasping or twisting. Lever handle designs are a successful solution. Recommendations for accessible doors include, but are not limited to, easy to read, permanent room signage with tactile characters, a side light or glass panel to assure the pathway is clear, and an optional auxiliary handle to aid in closing the door if it does not automatically close. The door should swing easily with no closer. The force to open a door is limited by the requirement of 5 pounds. For interior doors and 8.5 pounds for exterior doors. Exterior gates to facilities. Exterior gates that function as doors must be designed with ANSI compliant, usable hardware and maneuvering space. Latches that are operable with one hand and do not require grasping, pinching, or twisting should be used. Clear floor space should adjoin the gate area to allow safe maneuvering by a person using a mobility device to access the gate, open it, enter it, and pull it closed. Common standards for gate latches include placing them so that their operable parts are no higher than 48 inches above ground level. Some standards allow a height of 54 inches above the ground level at gates to swimming pools. Laundry facilities. Laundry facilities must be on an accessible route in an accessible area. Where there are laundry rooms that serve each floor of an elevator building, each laundry room must be accessible. Likewise, where there is one laundry room on a ground floor in each building, each must be accessible. Although front-loading machines are not required, adequate maneuvering space must be provided at washers and dryers so that a person who uses a wheelchair can approach and pull up close to the machine. The washer and dryer must have controls, including coin slots, within the reach range of a seated user. Please refer to the Fair Housing Act Design Manual, page 2.26 for more details. Mailboxes. Whether located outside on an FHA site or inside of an FHA covered building, mailboxes serving covered dwelling units must be in an accessible area and within reach ranges established in ANSI. Although typically not all mailboxes serve covered dwellings, it is recommended that all the mailboxes be placed within reach range. That means no higher than 54 inches for a side reach, no higher than 48 inches for a forward reach, no lower than 9 inches for a side reach, and no lower than 15 inches for a forward reach. This will ensure that regardless of the installed mailbox system or established numbering system, mailboxes serving ground floor dwellings will be in an accessible area. Exercise rooms. When an exercise room is provided for residents, care must be taken to ensure that at least one of each type of exercise device is on an accessible route, and that there is an accessible route around all equipment placed in the room. Swimming pools. Access must be provided to the pool deck and apron area when there is a swimming pool. The guidelines do not require an accessible route, which would be a ramp or a lift, down into pool water. Builders and owners should check ADA standards for pools. Recreation areas. The routes to areas inside playgrounds, game rooms, craft, or lounge areas must be accessible. When there are tables, counters, or work surfaces, one of each must be accessible, have knee space, and be mounted at 34 inches maximum above the floor. And this brings us to our fourth knowledge check, which reads, in a craft area, at least one work surface must be accessible, blank, and be mounted at 34 inches max above the floor. The first option, have knee space, and the second option, have turning space. So we'll go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this knowledge check reads, in a craft area, at least one work surface must be accessible, blank, and be mounted at 34 inches maximum above the floor. The first option, have knee space, and the second option, have turning space. All right, give a few more moments to get your selections in. All right, go ahead and close this poll. Thank you so much. That brings us to clubhouses. Many multifamily developments have a clubhouse facility that may be used for various activities. Typically, a clubhouse might include a multi-purpose room, a kitchen, toilet, video theaters, and more. All public and common use areas and amenities within a clubhouse facility must be accessible and on an accessible route. Whenever multiple features or facilities are provided, sufficient accessible features of each type must be provided. Multiple recreational facilities. When multiple recreational amenities, such as tennis courts, playgrounds, or spas are provided within the same development, the guidelines state that access to at least one or a sufficient number must be provided. For example, if there were 4 tennis courts, one would have to be accessible. However, if these were not in a central location, say 2 were clustered together to serve one part of a complex, and 2 others were clustered to serve the other part, then one in each cluster would need to be accessible. The number determined to be sufficient must ensure an equitable opportunity for use by people with disabilities. It is recommended that all recreational facilities are accessible when the site is relatively flat, and this can be easily achieved. Trash disposal areas. Tenant-used trash facilities are common use facilities that must be accessible. Trash dumpsters must have easy-to-operate hardware within the reach range specified by ANSI 4.2.6. The area must also have a minimum 36-inch wide accessible route. Notice that no curbs or other obstructions are in the path to the trash dumpster. If a trash room is provided on the upper floor of a building without an elevator, that room does not have to be on an accessible route if only serving that upper floor. And a trash room is provided on the level complying with the Fair Housing Act. In an elevator building, all trash rooms must be accessible. And with that, we're going to go into our key takeaways. The minimum specification in the ANSI standard for an accessible parking space is a 96-inch wide parking space and a 60-inch wide access aisle. Accessible parking spaces serving a public leasing office or a facility to open to the public located within a multifamily project are subject to the ADA and require a 96-inch wide access aisle for van accessible parking. For residents, 2% of parking spaces serving covered dwelling units must be available upon request by persons with disabilities. For visitors, if parking is provided, a sufficient number must be provided for access to grade level entrances of covered multifamily dwellings. A minimum of one space must be provided at a sales or rental office. Accessible doors must provide a minimum 32-inch clear opening and meet requirements for threshold, hardware, opening force, and maneuvering space. Exterior gates that function as doors must be designed with ANSI compliant usable hardware and maneuvering space. Laundry facilities must be on an accessible route in an accessible area. Mailboxes must be accessible and within reach ranges established in ANSI. Exercise rooms must have at least one of each type of exercise device on an accessible route and ensure an accessible route around all equipment in the room. The routes to areas inside playgrounds, game rooms, craft, or lounge areas must be accessible. In game rooms, craft, or lounge areas, if there are tables, counters, or work surfaces, one of each must be accessible. Have knee space and be mounted at 34 inches maximum above the floor. When multiple recreational amenities are provided, the guidelines state that access to at least one or a sufficient number must be provided. And with that, that brings us to topic 4, interior spaces. Interior facilities. Many public and common use spaces are located inside FHA covered buildings and have features that must be accessible for persons with disabilities. Drinking fountains. If drinking fountains are provided, at least 50% must be accessible with knee space and other features specified in ANSI. Workstations. When office centers are provided, there must be accessible workstations. one of each device, such as a fax machine, phone, computer, etc., must be on an accessible route and be placed at a workstation that is accessible. Sections of ANSI that could be used for guidance in designing accessible workstations are Section 4.2, Space Allowances and Reach Ranges, Section 4.2.4, Clear Floor or Ground Space, and Section 4.30, Seating Tables and Work Surfaces. Media amenities. Media items such as stereos, video monitors, and TV equipment are frequently provided in clubhouse facilities for residents' enjoyment and use. When provided during initial construction, these amenities must be placed on an accessible route and positioned so their operable controls are within ANSI compliant reach ranges. For a forward approach, the maximum height is 48 inches above the finished floor. And for a side approach, the maximum height is 54 inches. Designers must also refer to other applicable performance specifications of ANSI that may apply. This includes Section 4.2, Space Allowances and Reach Ranges, Section 4.3, Accessible Routes, and Section 4.4, Protruding Objects. Public use kitchens. A public use kitchen must have accessible features compliant with applicable sections of ANSI. Within U-shaped kitchens, there must be a 60-inch turning space or a T-type turnaround. A 30 by 48-inch clear floor space must be provided at ranges and cooktops in public kitchens. The clear floor space must be parallel to and centered on the appliance. Controls must be within reach ranges specified in ANSI, including the switch for the overhead hood if one is provided. ANSI kitchen sinks. Kitchen sinks in public and common use areas must comply with the applicable sections of ANSI 4.19. This includes lavatories, sinks, and mirrors. Key features of a compliant kitchen sink include a counter or rim height no higher than 34 inches, a maximum sink depth of 6.5 inches, a 30 by 48 inch clear floor space to allow a forward approach to the sink, which shall adjoin an accessible route and extend a maximum of 19 inches underneath the lavatory. Faucets must be usable without tight grasping or twisting. Hot water and drain pipes must be insulated or protected for safety. And with that, brings us to knowledge check 5, which reads, if drinking fountains are provided, at least blank must be accessible with knee space and other features specified in ANSI. The first option, 25%, the second option, 50%, and the third option, 75%. So I'll go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this reads, if drinking fountains are provided, at least blank must be accessible with knee space and other features specified in ANSI. The first option, 25%, the second option, 50%, and the third option, 75%. And I'll give folks a few more moments to get their selections in. All right, go ahead and close this poll. Thank you so much. And that actually leads us into our 6th knowledge check. A public use U-shaped kitchen must have a blank turning space or a T-type turnaround. The first option, 40 inches. Second option, 50 inches. And the third option, 60 inches. So let's go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this reads, a public use U-shaped kitchen must have a blank turning space or a T-type turnaround. The first option, 40 inches. Second option, 50 inches. And the third option, 60 inches. All right, a few more seconds to get those answers submitted. All right, go ahead and close this poll. Thank you so much. And that leads us to the topic 4 key takeaways. If drinking fountains are provided, at least 50% must be accessible with knee space and other features specified in ANSI. When office centers are provided, there must be accessible workstations and one of each device, such as a fax machine or a computer, must be on an accessible route and placed at a workstation that is accessible. Media amenities must be placed on an accessible route and positioned so their operable controls are within ANSI compliant reach ranges. Within a public U-shaped kitchen, there must be a 60-inch turning space or a T-type turnaround, and a 30 by 48-inch clear floor space must be provided at ranges and cooktops. Kitchen sinks in public and common use areas must comply with the applicable sections of ANSI 4.19. And with that, brings us to our final topic, topic 5, personal hygiene and care spaces. FHA coverage applies to common and public spaces where individuals may need to manage their personal hygiene care. Though these areas are publicly used spaces, access and privacy are essential. When designing accessible personal hygiene care spaces, there are two critical points to be mindful of. The first, the ease of use and safety of a person with a temporary or permanent disability. And the second, the extra space to accommodate a person who may be assisting a person who has a temporary or permanent disability. Experienced designers and builders recognize that increasing accessibility presents a more functional design and ensures compliance. Toilets and bathing rooms. When bathing facilities, shower rooms, urinals, stalls, and similar personal care spaces are provided in public or recreational areas, at least one fixture of each type provided must be accessible per room. If related features are provided, such as lockers, at least one of each type must be accessible and comply with applicable ANSI specifications. These spaces are required to be accessible for residents and their guests. Although neither the guidelines nor ANSI contains specifications for showers or dressing rooms, such as those that may serve a swimming pool, newer versions of ANSI, such as the 1998 version, contain requirements for dressing rooms. Accessible toilet rooms. Public toilet rooms must have knee space at sinks and pipe protection, grab bars for toilets mounted between 33 and 36 inches, but mounting them between 34 and 35 inches is recommended to allow a margin of error. Usable faucet handles, lever style that do not require gripping or twisting. Mirrors mounted with the bottom reflective edge no higher than the 40 inches above the finished floor. Paper towel dispensers, soap dispensers, coat hooks, and other accessories mounted no higher than 48 inches above the floor, but mounting them at 44 inches is recommended to ensure compliance. Moving along to our next knowledge check. Which features must sinks in public toilet rooms have? The first option, knee space. The second option, pipe protection. Or the third option, both. So let's go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this reads, which features must sinks in public toilet rooms have? Your first option, knee space. Second option, pipe protection. Or the third option, both. All right, I'll give a few more moments to get your selections in. All right, go ahead and close this poll. Thank you so much. That actually leads us into our next knowledge check. It is blank that grab bars in public toilet rooms be mounted between 34 and 35 inches. The first option, required, or the second option, recommended. So go ahead and launch this poll. And again, this reads, it is blank that grab bars in public toilet rooms be mounted between 34 and 35 inches. The first option is required, second option, recommended. All right, give a few more moments to get your selections in. All right, go ahead and close this poll as well. Thank you so much. And our ninth knowledge check. Mirrors in public toilets must be mounted with the bottom reflective edge no higher than blank above the finished floor. First option, 35 inches. The second option, 40 inches. And the third option, 50 inches. So let's launch this poll as well. And again, this reads, mirrors in public toilets must be mounted with the bottom reflective edge no higher than blank above the finished floor. First option, 35 inches. Second option, 40 inches. And the third option, 50 inches. All right, give a few more moments to get your selections in. All right, go ahead and close this poll. Thank you so much. Maneuvering spaces at toilets. Toilets in public and common use toilet rooms must comply with applicable clear floor space specifications in ANSI. The choices for designers include a 48 by 66 inch clear floor space for a front approach, a 48 by 56 inch clear floor space for a side approach, or a 60 by 56 inch clear floor space for a side or front approach. Accessible toilet stalls. A 60 inch wide toilet stall accommodates most users. The floor space allows a person who uses a wheelchair to maneuver into the best position to transfer onto the toilet. It also provides space for an attendant, if needed, to assist the person with a disability. Large toilet rooms. A sample plan for a large toilet room is shown here, with multiple toilets, lavatories, and urinals in the men's room. Each room shows a standard stall and an accessible lavatory. Additionally, the men's room includes a wall-hung urinal with an elongated bowl. Note the 48 by 54 inch maneuvering space at the push side of the doors, which is equipped with a latch and a closer to permit a push side approach to the door. Within each bathroom, there is also a 60-inch diameter maneuvering space. The guidelines require that at least one of each fixture type provided in a toilet room be accessible. Small toilet and dressing rooms. If showers are provided, for instance, in a toilet room adjacent to a pool area, at least one must be accessible and comply with the shower stall standards in ANSI. This sample plan shows a 36 by 36 inch transfer shower with a 30 by 48 inch clear floor space parallel to the shower, beginning at the control wall. Other features shown in this plan include an accessible lavatory, a standard accessible stall, a 60-inch maneuvering space within the room, and lockers on an accessible route. And with that comes to our final knowledge check. What is the width of a standard accessible toilet stall? Your first option, 48 inches. The second option, 60 inches. And the third option, 52 inches. So go ahead and launch this final poll. And again, this reads, what is the width of a standard accessible toilet stall? The first option, 48 inches. The second option, 60 inches. And the third option, 52 inches. All right, give a few more moments to get your selections in. All right, thank you so much. Go and close this poll. Thank you for participating in that. And now for our key takeaways. When bathing facilities, shower rooms, urinals, stalls, and similar personal care spaces are provided, at least one fixture of each type provided must be accessible per room. Public toilet rooms must have knee space at sinks and pipe protection. It is recommended that grab bars in public toilet rooms be mounted between 34 and 35 inches to allow a margin of error. Public toilet rooms must have usable faucet handles, lever style, that do not require gripping or twisting. Mirrors in public toilets must be mounted with the bottom reflective edge no higher than 40 inches above the finished floor. It is recommended that paper towel dispensers, soap dispensers, coat hooks, and other accessories in public toilet rooms be mounted at 44 inches. There are 3 clear floor space options for maneuvering space at toilets in public toilet rooms. A 60-inch wide standard accessible toilet stall allows space for an attendant to assist a person with a disability. In large toilet rooms, there must be a 48 by 54-inch maneuvering space at the push side of the door to permit a push side approach to the door. And lastly, if showers are provided, for instance, in a toilet room adjacent to a pool area, at least one must be accessible and comply with the ANSI shower stall standards. And with that, we are now at the Q&A portion. So I will read the questions that we had come in. Starting with Iris. Could you please show the differences when a residential complex includes some commercial and or office areas and or employees for administration or in-house management or in-house maintenance areas? Eric?
Thank you for that question. I think that's an important question. So the Fair Housing Act guidelines require that public and common use areas be accessible for persons with disabilities. Portions of residential sites that are used by residents and their guests are considered common use areas that are covered by the Act. Employee areas such as management offices, employee lounges, restrooms, storage, and maintenance areas are also considered common use areas, and they must comply with the Act. The portions of mixed-use projects containing commercial areas and office areas that are available for use by people other than residents and their guests, such as commercial and office suites, are not covered by the Act. But if they meet the definition of a place of public accommodation and or commercial facility as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act, they will be covered by the ADA. However, if an accessible route to a commercial area is through a residential portion, for example, a common use lobby or sidewalk that leads to the leasing office or a store, there may be some overlap, and these areas may be covered by both the ADA and the FHA.
Thank you for that answer, Eric. Our next question, and from Patricia, how can we be aware of the different accessible areas and changes to the law?
I would refer them to HUD's website at hud.gov, and you can search for disabilities. The website provides information for persons with disabilities and housing providers on various topics, including physical accessibility, reasonable accommodations, reasonable modifications, the newest guidance, and HUD press releases, and as well as effective communication. Another alternative is to look at the website for Fair Housing Accessibility First. The website contains training materials, frequently asked questions, schedule of upcoming trainings, list of safe harbors, approved for fair housing compliance, and other materials.
Thank you for that answer, Eric. We have time for just a few more. The next question that came in from Moses, do all laundry machines or dryers in a common laundry area need to be accessible, or is it okay to have stacked washer and dryer machines?
The laundry areas have to be on an accessible route, but the guidelines permit the installation of stacked washers and dryers. The requirements for controls applies to at least one of the stacked units. And please refer to the Fair Housing Act Design Manual, page 2.26, that clarifies the topic.
Thank you, Eric. I believe we have time for just a few more. From Stephen, is the 54-inch max height to the mailbox key operating part or the top of the mailbox?
We have to consider that the mailboxes are located in a public use and common use areas, and they must be accessible for persons with disabilities. The mailboxes serving covered dwelling units should be mounted between 15 inches to 54 inches above the floor to the highest operable part, that is the key.
Thank you for that answer, Eric. Our last question that we have time for from Paul. Are entrance doors to covered multifamily dwellings required to have push pads to automatically open doors? For example, when doors are heavier than 8 pounds or some other criteria?
The Fair Housing Act does not require installing automatic opening doors. Exterior doors tend to require a greater door opening force due to wind and also if they are fire-rated doors. Designers may choose to install a power door opener to overcome the door opening force, but this is not required.
Perfect. Thank you for that answer, Eric. At this point, we are now going to move to our knowledge check review. Starting with our first knowledge check. The guidelines establish, and the correct answer for this was the second option, ANSI A117.1-1986 as a minimum standard to comply with when designing public and common use areas. Moving on to knowledge check 2. Portions of public and common use areas open to the general public must comply with which disability rights law? And the correct answer for this was the second option, the ADA and the FHA. Moving right along, ANSI requires a 96-inch wide accessible parking space for parking for each site facility. And the correct answer for this was the first option. This is true. Moving on to knowledge check 4. In a craft area, at least one work surface must be accessible. And the correct answer for this was the first option, have knee space and be mounted at 34 inches maximum above the floor. Moving on to knowledge check 5. If drinking fountains are provided, at least, and the correct answer was the second option, 50% must be accessible with knee space and other features specified in ANSI. Moving on to knowledge check 6. A public use U-shaped kitchen must have and the correct answer was the third option, 60-inch turning space or a T-type turnaround. Moving on to knowledge check 7. Which feature or features must sinks in public toilet rooms have? And the correct answer for this is the third option, both. They must have knee space and pipe protection in public toilet rooms. Knowledge check 8. It is, and the correct answer was the second option, recommended that grab bars in public toilet rooms be mounted between 34 and 35 inches. Knowledge check 9. Mirrors in public toilets must be mounted with the bottom reflective edge no higher than, the correct answer was the second option, 40 inches above the finished floor. And then for our final knowledge check, what is the width of a standard accessible toilet stall? And the correct answer was the second option, 60 inches. Moving right along, certificates. You will receive an attendance certificate for attending at least 45 minutes of today's presentation. You will not receive an attendance certificate if you attended for less than 45 minutes. The attendance certificate will be sent to you on Wednesday. If you are still waiting to receive the attendance certificate by Thursday morning, please check your junk or spam email and email us at fairhousingfirst@hud.gov. If you take the final quiz and pass, you will receive a passing certificate. The final quiz will be in the email sent to participants 2 hours after the webinar. Quizzes may be taken at any time following this training event, and certificates of passing are automatically issued when a passing score of 80% is achieved. If you don't receive your passing quiz certificate by Friday evening, please check your junk or spam email, and you can email us at fairhousingfirst@hud.gov. Training evaluation. At the end of this training, there is a training event survey for you to complete. We appreciate your responses and support with improving our training products. Contacts. The DCRC is available to answer your questions by phone or email. Please contact us by calling 888-341-7781. And this is accessible by voice or talk to text, or emailing us at fairhousingfirst@hud.gov. Scan this QR code to add the DCRC's contact information to your cell phone's address book. This concludes the training. I want to thank you, the attendees, for participating. I want to thank our speakers and our ASL interpreters for supporting this training. This screen will remain up for the next 20 seconds for you to copy the contact information, and then we'll close the training. Thank you for attending, and I hope you have a great day.